Welcome to the Law Archive, Episode 1, The Democratic Order.
The Democratic Order represents the united governing body of 4 separate species living under one representative government. Today, we'll be taking an inside look at the history and workings of this bold new faction in the series Tales from Space. The Order today is comprised of 4 member races: the Jvalrim, the Balcot, the and the Felathanic. They inhabit a combined 15 planets and moons, with numerous smaller outposts in strategic areas, and have a population of roughly 51 billion individuals. The most populous planet, Valrim, while ostensibly their capital, is not always their seat of government. The Congress of Equals, the primary legislative body, shifts planets every 5 years in an effort to not show favoritism to one planet in particular. Members of this Congress are elected once per every million registered citizens in a particular region. But how did this collective of species come to be? To answer that, we have to venture back 182 years to the planet of Valrim. The Jvalrim were once an enslaved species, forced to do the bidding of an alien species known as the Sill, who imposed brutal punishments on those who resisted. After countless generations of forced labor in mining operations, a revolt began against the Sill. Not the first of its kind, the Sill responded with only light troop action, as had worked in past revolts. Though this revolt was different. An idea had begun to form amongst the Jvalrim of an almost mythical concept. A world where every individual had a say, where no one race or individual was morally or genetically superior. The rebels now had an idea to rally behind, a goal, a future. The revolt echoed across the planet, and after 2 decades of near constant warfare, the last Sill troops withdrew from Valrim. As the story goes, the leader of the rebellion, a man named Hul Penkar, became the de facto ruler of the species, an opportunity to sway every aspect of life and create a dynasty of his own. And yet, the day the Sill left, he brought himself before all and laid down his weapons, declaring, "A new order is upon our people, one democratic and just. No one person shall feel the lash of tyranny as long as our people still stand." Thus was born the Democratic Order, a government bent on preserving the rights of all, no matter the cost. Their storied history and newfound culture thus greatly valued martial prowess and political idealism.
The Order began a campaign of building up and strengthening their people, creating a strong and sustainable society rich with art and science. They journeyed to the stars and settled several moons. It was 49 years after the revolt that the Jvalrim discovered a previously unknown species, the Balcot. They appeared to be only just beginning to colonize outside of their home planet of Morcon. Contact began peacefully. Diplomatic envoys were assembled and a team was landed in their largest city to officially meet the Balcot's leader, Emperor Tanlan Voltiv. But upon landing, they saw a grim sight. An oppressive regime built on indentured servitude and outright slavery, punishments never kinder than death. Poverty was widespread, while the monarch lived lavish, cruel lives. The delegation was so disgusted that when it came time to meet the emperor, broadcasted live across Morcon, they openly denounced him as a tyrant and expressed their hatred at his treatment of his people. The emperor naturally commanded his soldiers to attack the diplomats, who surprisingly held out fighting until they were extracted by their ships in orbit. The diplomatic report to the Congress back on Valrim was so visceral and scathing that a complete and utter liberation of Morcon was demanded. Thus, the offensive security fleet was dispatched to Morcon and quickly overwhelmed any resistance in space. Among those captured in the fighting were Balcott dissidents, who happily agreed to help them overthrow the cruel Emperor. After only a year of fighting, the demand to end the Empire was so great that most military commanders simply refused to fight and pledged loyalty to the idea of a free society. The Emperor had no choice but to surrender. A new democratic government was formed, with initial oversight from the Democratic Order to aid in the creation and inalienable rights ensured to all. Soon after, a permanent embassy was established and the security fleet withdrawn, hailed as heroes by nearly all Balcott. 10 years later, a formal alliance was created that would still be known as the Democratic Order to ensure the idea of equality would always be at the forefront. A few years further on, and it shifted from a simple alliance into a singular governing body, making the Balcott the second member race.
The third member race to join the Democratic Order were the a race that started as a planet-wide mycelium network that worked as essentially one large brain. In order to break free of their near immobility, they created a suit for a part of them to inhabit over the course of many years. Once the first was made, its easier mobility was used to make more. As parts of the colony are put into a suit, they are essentially cut off and become an individual. When a Democratic Order ship discovered their world, Second of Kel, there was approximately 100,000 of them living in a single city on the equator. Initially thought to be pre-spacefaring, it was shown that they were in fact technologically capable and had simply not chosen to expand yet. After many months of attempted translation, they were able to begin rudimentary communication. They revealed their society was a direct democracy without a single leader. Satisfied with their freedom and a newfound friendship, the delegation established an embassy and was shocked when the formally requested membership. This request was granted after an overwhelming vote, and the became the third member species.
Not every story is quite as friendly, though. Such is the case for the fourth member race, the Felathanic, initially discovered after ambushing the Democratic Order survey ship Receptor and attempting to forcefully board the ship before miraculously being repelled by a largely non-violent captain named Ref. The ship escaped and alerted the Democratic Order skirmish fleet, a rapid response division of the Navy which arrived soon after. The attackers were swiftly captured and interrogated. After this, it was determined that they did not represent a government force and had acted alone as raiders. They led the fleet to their home planet Tullus, where after weeks of attempted contact, it was ultimately shown that the global government had collapsed some years before, and little to no real governments existed. The cause of the collapse was generally believed to be an attempt to artificially create a virus that would target all diseases within a body instead of the body itself. This attempt backfired and led their population to be decimated.
Lacking any semblance of stability, a cure was far out of reach for the Felathanic, and so the Democratic Order scientists produced one and distributed it to the largest remaining population center of about 190,000. When they returned on a survey mission 3 years later, the leader of the city had exerted control over most of the planet's remaining populated zones, by using the withholding of a cure as leverage. A grueling campaign was undertaken to forcibly prevent hoarding of the cure and ended with a military occupation of Tullus that lasted 5 years. Once the cure was distributed, the Order oversaw the framing and election of a democratic government, as well as assisting with the rebuilding of major infrastructure left in ruins after the collapse. Sometime later, the new Phalathanic Governorate requested they withdraw forces, to which they agreed. While most idolized the Order, some resented them for perceived interference in their affairs. These individuals made their way into the Governorate and worked to undermine relations with the Order. Approximately 9.5 years later, an unknown race known as the Talak appeared on the edge of the Tullus system. They struck the outermost defenses of the system, then moved on to the recently established colony of Eltol, where the meager fleet of the Governorate held for 16 hours before falling. Now there was nothing standing between the Talak fleet and Tullus. The citizens pleaded with the Governorate to contact the Democratic Order and request aid. But those in government who had pushed against good relations with the Order refused to allow it. In desperation, a group of citizens, with the not-so-well-hidden backing of some members of the Governorate, resorted to commandeering a previously Raider-owned ship and successfully bypassed the Talak battle lines, making it to Democratic Order space where they urgently requested assistance. 2 days went by, and many on Tullus began to fear that the ad hoc delegation had been unable to slip past the fleet. Their fates were sealed. Though, just as the Talak fleet reached Tullus and engulfed the sky, the blinding flash of a fission bomb detonated against the side of the lead ship, sending its mangled scraps streaming out into the void. The Democratic Order's fleet had arrived. Aided by a small group of Phalathanic privateer ships, the Talak fleet was routed and withdrew from Tullus. Several weeks later, a large Talak force bombarded the Order world of Sheol, killing tens of thousands before the skirmish fleet could arrive and drive them off. This fleet disappeared into space just as they had come. Their location was never found, no contact ever made, and their reasoning never known. The Order's true colors were finally revealed even to those who had doubted. Their sacrifice to save those who were not their own species catapulted their status to saviors in the public eye, and membership was quickly voted in favor of by both governments, thus making the Phalathanic the fourth and most recent member race. Though rumors abound regarding the inclusion of a fifth race. This brings us to the present day. The drone force threatens all. The Democratic Order is engaged in a border war with an insectoid species known as the Uru, and the future remains entirely uncertain.